So we will begin today, as usual, with reciting refuge and bodhicitta prayers. O sangye chudan soge chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsumje dage jinso gibe sunamji drola penjir sanje drobar sho sangye chudan soge chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsumje dage jinso gibe sunamje drola benjir sanje drobar sho sangye chedan soge chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsumje dage jinso gibe sunamje drola penjir sanje drobar sho sanje damje dewa tan dewe judan nambar jurje donga tan donga je judan rawa jurje donga mebe dewa tampa tam minrawa jurje nyeren shadanidan Rawa danyon shambola nebra In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And so now please begin by thinking to yourself about your motivation. And again, we need to have as good a motivation as possible. The best motivation is, of course, the motivation of bodhicitta. That's the motivation of thinking that all sentient beings have been our mothers in past lifetimes. They've been extremely kind to us in past lifetimes. Not only that, because of interdependence. This is the subtler form of interdependence, not the 12 links that we spoke about in the past few days. Because of interdependence, we are all dependent upon one another, and we could not live without each other. And so for that reason, all sentient beings have been incredibly kind to us. And when someone's kind to you, you want to repay that kindness. Repay that kindness by making sure that they're going to be happy. And yet if we make sentient beings happy for a short time, then it's only a short time. And it's limited. We can cure people. We can cure everyone of coronavirus. And then when the next pandemic comes along, they're going to get something else. It's just the nature of how things are. So the only thing we can do is bring sentient beings to a state where no matter what happens to them on the outside, they're fine on the inside. Their mind's okay. And that is eventually coming to the state of Buddhahood. So think to yourself that let's bring all sentient beings, that we must bring all sentient beings, no matter what, to the state of completely perfect Buddhahood. And that in order to bring sentient beings to Buddhahood, we must listen to, contemplate, and meditate upon the Dharma. So when we are engaging in studies such as we're doing here, we're engaging in the process of listening. Then when you take this back later, and you study this later, you reread the text, you think about what has been said, the meaning of what Vasubandhu wrote, what Wangchuk Dorje wrote, and so forth, and then you think about it, that's contemplation. And eventually we might get to the point where we meditate on it, although usually we do slightly different meditations than meditations exactly on the meanings taught in the Abhidharma, especially in our Tibetan tradition. But having that basic understanding from listening and contemplating is a stepping stone for us to be able to meditate. And so, thinking to yourself in this way, please listen with this motivation of bodhicitta. And the Dharma that we are listening to is the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, the verses on the Treasury of Abhidharma, which has 8 chapters. Of course, the auto-commentary has 9 chapters, but the verses themselves have 8. And so the commentaries on the verses, especially in the Tibetan tradition, mostly also have 8 chapters, as does Wangchuk Dorje's commentary entitled Youthful Play. And so in the commentary Youthful Play, there are 8 chapters. The first 2 chapters present the general presentation of phenomena, what they are, classifying them, and then describing how they arise and interact and so forth. And then the subsequent chapters teach the 4 noble truths. And so we are in the discussion of the 3rd chapter, which is a discussion of the truth of suffering. Though it is a discussion of the truth of suffering, it's called Teachings on the World. And so this has 2 parts, the discussion of the world of sentient beings, which we completed yesterday. And so now we've got to the second half of the chapter, the outer world that contains them. And so this section of the Abhidharma is one that a lot of people find incredibly fascinating. Some people, and traditionally it was thought, oh, this is how the world is. And so we'll talk about that issue for a moment, because it's quite different than how we think of the world being now. But at any rate, people find it fascinating for that reason, or some people now think of it as being fascinating because it's a description of how people thought the world is. That's another interesting idea. And so we've got this question. So people find it very interesting. Actually, in many respects, especially the opening passages of this section, it's just like a geography lesson. Where are the different places? How big are they? What are their perimeters? And things like that. So actually, it's kind of simple in some respects, but it's still good to go and take a look at it. But we really do come up with against a big problem here, a big problem for contemporary students of this, because when we go to school, we learn about the Earth as a planet that is spherical, that orbits the sun. And we see a lot of evidence that actually corroborates this. We get in airplanes, and the airplanes can fly around the world. And that the fact that the airplanes can fly around the world is at least in part due to GPS satellites that orbit the world. And we can see pictures of the world from space where it looks like a marble floating in the middle of nothingness. And so this is the idea of the world we have. Now, in saying that this is an idea, please don't think that I'm a flat earther, because I'm also not a flat earther. But it's just that the way the Earth appears to us is how it appears to us now, given our education and our setting. And so, it could well be that this is, it seems pretty likely, given all the things that technology allows us to do, and technology is based on ideas of a spherical or almost spherical, not a perfectly spherical, I guess. It's a little bit off shape, isn't it? Some squashed on one end or the other, kind of a squashed spherical planet that's orbiting the sun, and is one of others planets orbiting a sun. So there's a lot to say, that we can probably say that the understanding of the world that we have from a scientific perspective is in terms of the power of material fact. It's probably a better approximation of what the world actually is than what is described in the Abhidharma. So what is described in the Abhidharma? Well, we'll get to exactly what the description is, and that it's a description of a world, and it's flat, and it's got a big mountain in the middle and 4 continents where people live on each of the 4 sides, the east, south, west, and north. And so getting into the specifics of that, that's what we'll go on today. But if you look at it, when you fly a rocket ship up into space, a rocket ship, now I'm sounding like I'm from the 1930s. When you go I certainly wasn't around in the 1930s. That was a little bit before my time. When you go into space and you look down, you can't see Mount Meru. And so we might be tempted to say, oh, therefore all the teachings in the Abhidharma are wrong. And this is something we have to think about. It's a really interesting question. So I think the way we have to look at it is we kind of have to look at it on a perspective, a little bit of a cultural, historical perspective, actually. I mean, we have to, and since we're approaching this as most of us all of us who are here in my entire studio audience, and myself included, are all people who have received contemporary secular educations, and probably most of the listeners elsewhere on through the internet also have contemporary secular educations. For us, how is it, we have to use the tools that we have. So I think the first thing we have to look at is, what is the context in which this presentation of the world was first taught? And so when we look at it, where we find this description of the world is we find it in the Vinaya. There are some descriptions of it in the Vinaya. We find it described in sutras. It's described in Mahayana sutras. I don't know the Foundation Vehicle sutras very well. I don't even know the Mahayana sutras very well because I spend too much time reading treatises. Bad Tibetan habit, perhaps. But at any rate, it's described in the sutras in the Vinaya. And so the teachings that come in this chapter, as most of the teachings in the Abhidharma and most of the treatises are taken from the sutras in the Vinaya. So in some sutra, the Buddha might have said, to the north of here there are the 9 black mounts, and on the other side there is the unheated lake, the Anavatapta, the lake, and there is a jambu tree there. So the Buddha said this, or perhaps Maudgalyana might have said it, or some other person said it in a sutra, and then it was recorded and all collected here in this. But is this presentation of the world, therefore, something that the Buddha came up with? And the evidence here is that actually probably not. Now, I must admit, this is not my main area of research. And I have not gone and done adequate research into where this presentation of the world comes from. It could well, it seems, because it's shared with the Jain tradition and also with, I think, some Hindu traditions, it seems that this is actually more likely just a general ancient Indian conception of the universe. Now, I mean, and I did take this step. If you look up things like, we all know that the world that we're on is called Jambudvipa in Sanskrit, right? We don't all know that. Some of you, most of us know, many of us know that this world in Sanskrit is called Jambudvipa. And the Jambudvipa is said to be one of either 4 or 7 or however many continents there are around the great mountain in the center of the universe, Mount Meru. And in the Buddhist tradition, we say 4. If you look in Wikipedia, they say, was it 7 or 8? I don't remember. So it's like this is part of a kind of common tradition about the presentation of the world. So in other words, when the Buddha was presenting the teachings about the world, he was not presenting teachings about the world as it actually is. He was presenting these teachings about the world as it appeared to people, or as people of his time thought about it. For example, let's think about it. If you were some Brahmin or some Indian person, well-educated. You couldn't read because no one read. Everyone memorized everything, but you knew a lot of sutras and so forth. You were an educated Indian person. They had traditions of study, and they'd passed down. Maybe you'd learned all the Vedas and things like that. And the Buddha were to come along as a teacher and say, now I'm going to teach the world. It is a heliocentric universe, and there are 9 planets, or 8 planets now. I guess one of them's been demoted, hasn't it? So 8 planets, and then a couple of almost planets out there in the Kuiper Belt. And the sun is just one of many stars that are all floating in a galaxy. And this Earth is round. The person would have looked at you and said, wait a minute, no. I don't accept it. You can look. You can see with your own eyes that the Earth is flat, they would say. Look, where is the curvature in the Earth? I don't see it. It must be flat. So if the Buddha had given a presentation of the Earth that we would recognize as being factual, then the people of his time would not have accepted it. When the Buddha gave teachings on the world, he often taught about how things were described in what we call, in the text, it's often called worldly consensus. If something just didn't really matter, then the Buddha would just present it according to how everyone talked about it. So in terms of when we're going to achieve liberation, it really just doesn't make much of a difference at all whether the Earth is flat or whether the Earth is round. The question is not the external Earth. The question is our mind and how we're going to work with our mind, how we're going to deal with stopping the progression of the 12 links of interdependence. That's what we need to worry about. Round, flat, cubic, who cares on a certain sense? But people want to know. So on one level we look at it, the Buddha's presentation of the world is a presentation according to the prevailing ideas of that time. In other words, he just took Indian mythology and decided it wasn't worth it. Let's just give it as it is. So this is what we talk about 2 different types of teachings. There are the teachings that we call the guiding meaning, and then there's the definitive meaning. The guiding meaning, a lot of people talk about it as the expedient meaning. That's another more common translation. But in Tibetan, it's called guiding. Zhangwa, Zhangden. And the reason is because it takes you in and brings you into the path. So the teachings on the world, the external world, are not teachings about the ultimate truth. They are teachings about the relative. According to worldly consensus, they are guiding meaning, so that then people can come to understand the world better, or understand themselves and their mind better, understand the basic nature of how things work better. So in that way, we don't have to, on that level, it's kind of like we don't have to worry too much about the concordance of the traditional Indian model and the Sanskrit, and our current idea where you have the sphere and you have the flat, and these two are obviously completely different. We don't have to worry about that too much, because we can just say this is guiding meaning and this is a much more advanced, better, closer presentation to the reality. Because right now we look at things and we'd say from our perspective that the current scientific understanding of the solar system is far better. It's much better at predicting the movement of the planets in the sky and all that. So, I don't need to, I'm sure you all are aware of the benefits of thinking about the Earth as the solar system as heliocentric and the universe is basically non-centric. Basically the current scientific model, generally accepted scientific model of the universe. But there is a problem here. Because if we just say that, then, how much of the Buddha's presentation is guiding meaning? Because if we say it's guiding meaning, and yet he also talks about the 3 realms of existence, he talks about within the desire realm, he talks about the locations of the hells. He talks about how, and so the hells are beneath this continent, the continent of Jambudvipa, as we'll get to tomorrow. And Then we've got the realms, the desire realm gods that are above the top of Mount Meru. And there are stories in the sutra of the Buddha taking people to various locations. There's a story in the sutras about the Buddha spending several months in the heaven of the 33. There are stories about the hells. Now, if you say that the lowest of the hells, the incessant hells, 20,000 leagues below Bodh Gaya, and you go 20,000 leagues below Bodh Gaya and you're just someplace out in the middle of space because there just aren't 20,000 leagues in the earth. You go 20,000 leagues straight down from Bodh Gaya, you're going to come out the other side and be someplace. So is what? Is that hell floating around in the solar system someplace? What is it? Where are the realms of the gods? And so that is a much more difficult question, and I don't think it's one that we can really definitively say, because it's also said that these places are not places that we can easily visit ourselves, and even if we're not able to see them, like when gods come from the higher realms down to the earth, and they're not really necessarily able, people aren't necessarily able to see them. They're kind of on a different plane. So it's like a really difficult question. Is it just that something that's beyond our perception? Or is just saying that is the location given as a convenient thing because we always think of falling down into hell. So say, okay, way down in the earth is basically what you're saying. Does that mean that it's in the core of the earth? Is it something? Where is it? But I think the main point we have to think about these is we have to look at our own minds and see what we're doing. If we talk about the hells as being the ripening of acts done out of hatred, you look at the nature of hatred in your mind. When you feel strong hatred, if you look, even if you feel what you think is a small amount of aversion, if you look at the essence of that feeling, of that affliction, I think you might be surprised at how intense it actually is. So it's like the ripening of that intensity of that seed we have in our mind. And so wherever it ends up being physically is kind of less important, as just realizing that seed that we have in our own mind can then ripen as an experience that corresponds to the intensity of that seed in a future lifetime. So then whether we say, okay, the incessant hell is in the core of the earth, somewhere beneath the mantle, or do we say it's off in the middle of the sun? Who knows? Who cares, really? But basically, if we look at our minds and see that if that seed is what takes us on to our next rebirth, then we have to be careful. We also have to remember that we can only really see a portion of the universe. I mean, with our naked eyes, we only see a fraction of the, what is this radius? Is it ultraviolet? Not ultra, the light. Light is on a spectrum of something, right? What is that spectrum called? You can tell it's been too long since I studied science. I stopped studying science 35 years ago. Longer than that now, 37 years. So for me to forget this I hope it's understandable. I should be more aware of it, but then I am. But it's just like a tiny portion of the spectrum. There's the infrared below what we can see, there's the ultraviolet above, and there's visible light in the middle. So we're seeing this tiny amount of it with our naked eyes. And even with instrumentation, then we're still only seeing parts of it. And then there are probably ways of looking at the earth that we just haven't even, that just are completely beyond our imagination. And so I think if we realize that our own perception is limited, then it makes sense that we can't perceive everything, because we're not perceiving everything. If we were perceiving everything, then we'd be seeing ultraviolet light, and we're not. So, where do we go? So with that, I think I might as well just I have to start on the actual text of the chapter at some point. But this is just something that we have to keep in mind, because there is that big gap between our current understanding of the universe and the traditional understanding of the universe. And there are some people for whom, in recent times, we shouldn't laugh at it, but there are people who grew up studying this presentation as the presentation of the world, who then come out of the monastery and hear the earth is a sphere, and it's like really difficult for them to understand. Maybe not so much anymore. There's been a lot more science education, but I certainly did meet a few people who, very well-educated people, but educated in a traditional way, who had finished many, many years of study and then came out and had encountered science and saying, wow, the earth is like this. When I first went to Nepal, I mean, many of the monks in our monastery were asking me, well, what is the solar system like? And I had to rack my brain to remember everything, and they say, how does it work? Because they hadn't had science education. And that's not a question of them not being smart or anything like that. It's a question of the educational system that they've been brought up in. Nowadays, most monks and nuns also receive scientific education to varying degrees. But they generally know that the earth is not flat nowadays. Anyways, here we are going into the text of the chapter. And so with this discussion now, the world that contains sentient beings, there are three topics here. The nature of the supporting container, that is the nature of the physical earth and so forth. Additionally, the sizes of sentient beings, body size and lifespan, and see the units of measure. An interesting one. So the nature of the supporting container has four topics: a general teaching of the container's nature, an explanation of the particular places, identifying the world of the 3,000s, and teaching that the 3,000s arise and are destroyed together. So we're obviously going to start with the first, the general teaching of the container's nature. So this is two topics: an explanation of the three supporting mandalas, and an explanation of the mountains and seas they support. The explanation of the three supporting mandalas has two topics: the size of the mandala of wind and the size of the other two mandalas. So here what we have, basically, we have supporting mandalas underneath this earth. So the earth, shall we say, the world, is conceived of as a disk, and underneath that there are two mandalas, which are like disks that support it. So what are those disks? Well, the first one is the mandala of wind. Now the container world is said to have below a mandala of wind 1,600,000 in depth, uncountable. So to explain the container, so the container is a synonym for the environment of the world that contains sentient beings. In general, according to sutras of the foundation and great vehicles, some world realms are upside down, some are sideways, some have no cover above, some have no sun and moon. In some, a single sun and moon orbit the entire 3,000s, that is an entire world, a universe with 3 billion worlds. And in some, the entire 3,000s is the size of the Bodhi tree, so like a billion worlds fitting in the size of the Bodhi tree. Now, the Bodhi tree is a pretty big tree, as trees go, but that's pretty small for a billion worlds. Many such worlds are said to exist, but in this presentation, it is time to explain the unbearable world realm of our teacher, the Buddha Shakyamuni. So the unbearable world realm, the Sahaloka. This is the realm of the Buddha Shakyamuni. So in this, the container of the world, the great 3,000s, is said to exist as follows. So basically saying that worlds appear in many different ways, different types of worlds. And so this paragraph here does not reflect anything in the Adho commentary, although there is another passage in the Abhidharma commentary in the 4th chapter. But basically, there are just many worlds come in many different shapes and sizes. We can even, like there's the 19th century novel Flatland. Do you all ever read Flatland? About a two-dimensional universe. And so one of the places, one of the texts talk about there being a flat universe. So there are many different ways that the world is said to appear. And here, this world is the realm of the Buddha Shakyamuni, as it says, through the power of sentient beings' karma. In the space that is a foundation below it, this world, that is below this world, there is a mandala of wind. So you've got wind, and now this that is 1,600,000 leagues in depth. Now, a league, we'll get to that unit of measure is described later. You can think of it, since we're in Canada, I have to give the kilometers first. So it's 7.5 kilometers approximately, 7.4, 7.5, depending upon how precise you are in your math and what you're measuring in relation to it. Anyways, just for the sake of ease, let's say 7.5, or about 4.5 miles. That's a pretty big mandala in depth, right? And it's uncountable leagues across in diameter. Now, uncountable either means just that it's too big to count, or uncountable can also be a number of 10 to the 59th power. So if you have 10 to the 59th power, so you have, that's one uncountable, right? And an uncountable leagues would therefore be 7.5 uncountable kilometers, right? Now, there are about, 9.7 trillion kilometers per light year. So if it's an uncountable as in the 10 to the 59th, then this mandala is going to be something like, 7 times 10 to the 43 third power, to use scientific notation, across. That's a pretty big mandala. Okay, if we're talking about uncountable using the actual number uncountable. This mandala is so hard that even a Vajra of great power cannot destroy it. Of course, at that time, they had no idea of light years, so I'm using a modern type of measurement. And whether it actually takes, whether at that time they considered of light as actually having a speed is another interesting question. At any rate, this uncountable leagues across in diameter. It is so hard that even a Vajra of great power cannot destroy it. So there's this mandala that forms because of the power of being's karma. It is made out of wind, and it is formed so solid that it is huge in diameter, and 1,600,000 leagues in depth is also like over 10 million kilometers deep, right? So it's huge and hard. And then on top of that, there are two other mandalas, and the next is a description of their size, explaining their depth individually and explaining their diameter together. So there are two mandalas that are the same depth, but the same diameter, but they're different in depth. It's kind of like cake layers where the layers are different. You've got one 2-inch cake layer and one 1-inch cake layer on top. Okay? Makes it easier to think about if you think about it in terms of cake. But they're not cake, it's water and gold. The two topics are the mandala of water and the mandala of gold. And the mandala of water has two parts. It has its size at the time it coalesces, and then its size when it abides. So what happens is, after as the text says, then water to a depth of 1,120,000. So you've got the huge mandala of wind, and then on top of that there's a force of, then it rains, as it says in the commentary, by the power of the karma of sentient beings, sheets of rain, the drops of which are the size of yokes. This is actually, I translated a little bit later, literally. When it talks about sheets of rain the size of yokes, what it really means is just pouring cats and dogs. It poured cats and dogs by the power of karma. This is something you see in a lot of texts. It's raindrops the size of yokes. So it's like when you have the rain that's just sheeting down, and you see, a yoke is about that long, right? So you've got a sheet of rain of about that length. So this is what we say in English, pouring cats and dogs. But it wasn't pouring cats and dogs. It was pouring water in space from clouds with golden essences. So the clouds are, water and gold. That becomes a mandala of water to a depth of 1,120,000 leagues. the water does not immediately spill away because of the force of karma. So the karma of sentient beings, just as the karma of sentient beings makes the mandala of wind solid, so too does the karma of sentient beings make this mandala of water that is, 1,120,000 leagues in depth. It makes it all stay in like this kind of cosmic hockey puck. So its size when it abides. Then it becomes 800,000 in depth. So what happens is that the winds of karma churn the water. This is water that fell from clouds with golden essences, so the water's got some gold in it. And the water and the gold separate. But instead of the gold sinking to the bottom as you would think, the gold floats to the top, the water goes to the bottom. It's kind of like when you churn milk, then you get cream, the layer of cream forming on the top. We don't churn milk anymore. We let the dairies do it for us. But that is what happened when you take milk. It has not been homogenized. You can't do this with milk you buy in the grocery store. You have to get raw milk, and then you churn it, and you'll get cream and butter. Then a wind that arises from the karma of sentient beings churns all the water, and it becomes 800,000 leagues in depth. Oh, there's an extra hyphen there. So there's 800,000 leagues in depth. So there's water to depth of 800,000, and on top of that, what you have is the mandala of gold. The rest turns into gold. Just as when milk boils, curd forms, the rest turns into the earth itself with a nature of gold and a depth of 320,000 leagues. So you might remember when we recite the mandala prayer in the Tibetan tradition, and we talk about so we talk about the earth with the powerful golden essence and things like that. You see this image of the earth with the golden essence. This is what it's talking about, this mandala of gold. Okay? So the essence of gold. And that is at a depth of 320,000 leagues, the rest. So explaining their diameter together, this has 2 points. The mandalas of water and gold are in diameter 1,203,450 leagues across. So that's the diameter, the big number, 1,203,450. The mandalas of water and gold that lie under each of the 100 million worlds of the 4 continents. So each world of the 4 continents has its own mandala of water and so forth, are on diameter 1,203,450 leagues across. The diameters of these 2 mandalas are equal. So it's like I said, there you've got your thick layer of vanilla and your thin layer of chocolate, your thick layer of water and your thin layer of gold, right? And their circumference, they're thrice that in circumference. They're thrice that in circumference. So they're, which means that their circumferences are 610,350 leagues, which is exactly 3 times the 1,203,450. Now, they did not calculate using pi. I'm sorry. They could have used 22/7, but they didn't do that either. They took the shortcut. They just said 3 times across. You got to give them credit for getting close enough with 3 times across. So there's no pi here. When we talk about circumferences calculated from diameters. So I'm wondering when the Greeks started talking about pi. Obviously, it was at the time of the Buddha, that idea had not reached India. But it doesn't really matter. It's kind of a minor point. An explanation of the mountains and the seas they support. This is 2 topics, an explanation of the 9 mountains and an explanation of the 8 seas. Okay, so there are 9 mountains. Now, when we say mountains here, actually for some of them you kind of mean mountain ranges. So when we talk about mountains, you can think about mountain ranges. It might be helpful in some of these. Some of them are definitely mountains, and some of them are pretty definitely mountain ranges, or what we'd think of as mountain ranges. And this is 3 topics: where they are and what they are created from, and explaining their sizes. On that, are Marrow, the yoke holder, plow holder, and acacia tree, and likewise lovely to behold, and horse's ear, and bowing down rim holder mounts, then continents. Outside there is the outer ring. So we've got 9 mountains. There's Mount Marrow in the center. Then around that there's the yoke holder. It's like that's like a range, and the plow holder is the next. Then acacia tree, lovely to behold, horse's ear, bowing down in the rim holder mountains. And so those are like in the center of the universe. And then outside of that, you've got the continents. That would be Jambudvipa, or the Rose Apple Land, and so forth. And then outside there is the outer ring. So at the very perimeter of that, of the mandala of water and gold, there is this. There is the ring of iron mountains. Like, so when you're doing the mandala, you've got the 37 features. You've got, first you do a Mount Marrow in the center, and then you do that circle around the outside. That circle around the outside is that ring of the outer ring of iron mountains. 7 are gold. That one is, so what cause they are created from, or what material they're created from? 7 are gold. That one is iron. Mount Marrow is 4 precious ores. So the 7 mountain ranges of yoke holder and so forth are made of gold. That one, the outside ring of mountains, is iron. Mount Marrow is created of 4 precious ores. Its east is silver, the south Vaidurya. Vaidurya is often translated as lapis lazuli, but it actually is probably more likely blue beryl. When we talk about the medicine Buddha, for example, many people think of the medicine Buddha as being the color of lapis lazuli. Now, the color of lapis lazuli is the right color, but lapis is a solid stone, whereas the medicine Buddha is actually translucent, which is, this Vaidurya is a translucent. So it often is blue. It's sometimes kind of greenish. It varies in hue. It's probably beryl or volcanic glass, actually. But the Sanskrit word Vaidurya is just so much nicer than beryl. So we'll use Vaidurya for now. So that is the Vaidurya. It's not lapis lazuli, unfortunately. All those of you who learned about the medicine Buddha being the color of lapis, I'm sorry to say. The west is red crystal, and the north is gold. The color of the 4 faces of the Supreme Mountain. Now, the Supreme Mountain is another name for Mount Marrow, and the color of the sky of their corresponding continents appear similarly. So it's like when the sun reflects off the Vaidurya face, the southern Vaidurya face of the Mount Marrow, then it reflects blue. And that's why the sky is blue over our continent. If we were in the west where there is red crystal, then the sky would be red, right? So that's basically what it's saying. The color of the sky depends upon the light that is reflecting off of that. And since we can't go very far, can't get all the way over to the other continents, we only see the blue sky. Now, the reason for this is that sheets of rain that fell from space and formed the mandala of water below the golden earth contained elements of gold, various jewels, and so forth. When churned by the wind, so we talked about how that mandala formed, right? There was churned, and the gold fell, it was like butter on the top. Well, it wasn't just gold in there. There are some other materials too. There was some iron. That iron kind of got all on the outside, mostly on the outside in the outer ring. And then there are the others, like Mount Marrow got the 4, and then mainly gold in the other 7 mountain ranges. So that is how those happened. Then explaining their sizes. This is 2 topics: explaining how far they descend into the water together, and explaining how high each ascends above the water individually. Down 80,000 into water plunges Mount Marrow. So you've got the base of Mount Marrow is big, and now from the base of Mount Marrow, from sea level at Mount Marrow, down another 80,000 leagues in the sea, even further than Jules Verne talked about. Jules Verne talked about 20,000. We're talking about 80,000 leagues under the sea. To the bottom is where that. So there's that. The base of Mount Marrow is like 80,000 leagues down. Okay, and they're all the same. Also, the plow holder, rim holder, and so forth, and the lovely beholden acacia tree mountains, and so forth. They go down 80,000. And so this means that, like the oceans, are 80,000 leagues deep. Explaining how high each ascends above the water individually, this has two topics: the size of Mount Meru and the sizes of others. Above as well, it lofts to 80,000 leagues. Just as it descends into the water, above as well, it lofts to 80,000 leagues. So Mount Meru goes 80,000 leagues down to the base, and then it also goes 80,000 leagues up into the sky. So combining the two, the height of the supreme mountain is 160,000 leagues, which is, in kilometers, it's pretty big. It's like well over 1 million kilometers, right? 1.6 times 7.5 is what? 7.5 plus, 7 plus 5 plus 2, it's going to be like 1,200,000 kilometers approximately. Something like that. I'm no good at doing math in my head anymore. The sizes of the others, this has 2 points. The eight are each half less in width. So the 8, including the 7 mountain ranges in the perimeter circle, that is the great iron outer ring. Outer ring, perimeter circle. Outer ring, it should be here. Perimeter circle was a name used in an earlier draft that got changed in some places but not in others. The 8, including the 7 mountain ranges and the outer ring, are each half less than the previous mountain range in width. So you've got the Mount Meru is 80,000, right? So the yoke holder is the largest with a width of 40,000 leagues because it is half of Meru. Then plow holder is next, so it's half of that, or 20,000, and so forth, going down and down and down. And then until you get to the ring of iron mountains around the edge of the entire world, and that is 312.5 leagues in width. That's pretty thin. That 312.5 leagues, that is what? That is something like 2,000 kilometers. Well, a little bit more now, 2,000 to 300, 400, somewhere around in there. You can get your calculators. Their heights are equal to their widths. There, the heights of those mountains and these ranges, have heights equal to their widths. So in the yoke holder, they're 40,000 and then 20,000 and so forth, down to 312.5 leagues for the outer ring. So those are the 8, or the 9 mountain ranges. And in between the mountain ranges, there are oceans or seas. So explanations of the 8 seas. This has 3 points. The first is the 2 topics, an explanation of the 7 playful seas, and 8 is an explanation of the outer ocean. The explanation of the 7 playful seas. Now, this term is not described here in the Abhidharma or the auto commentary, but what it means is they're called playful because these are where the Nagas disport and enjoy themselves. So there are 7 playful seas. This is 3 points. The way the 7 playful seas are, between them 7 playful seas. So between Meru and the yoke holder, there is the first playful sea. Between the yoke holder and the plow holder, there's the second, and so forth. Between each of those, basically on the inside of each of these 7 mountain ranges, there is a playful sea. Across, the first is 80,000. This one is the vast inner sea. Its sides are triple to its width. So when you go from the side of, you've got, this would be easier to describe with a board, obviously, but I'm not doing the board for a reason that you will figure out in just a few moments. But you've got what do we say? You've got the sides what do we have? What do I have here? I have an iPad. This is my prop. Put this down for the moment. Ooh, there go my glasses. Okay. So we're going to imagine that this table is the one of the sides of the yoke holder mountains, like the first of the circle of mountains. And the iPad is Mount Meru. How appropriate. So basically, between the mountains and Mount Meru, if you go straight across at the shortest point, directly across, it's 40,000 leagues. Does that make sense? From there to there is 40,000 leagues. Okay? And then from there to the mountains on this side would be 40,000, 40,000, and 40,000. No, not 40,000. I'm saying the wrong number. 80,000. Across the first is 80,000. So you've got 80,000 from the yoke holder to Meru, 80,000 to the yoke holder to Meru. So on either side, you've got 80,000. So in other words, it's like a big thing. You've got Meru is 80,000 leagues on a side. Then you've got, and it's square. Of course, this is a rectangular. Pretend this iPad is square. And then around it, there is the yoke holder. And so basically, you've got 80,000 here, 80,000 there, 80,000 there. So all the way across here, you've got 80,000, then the Mount Meru, and then you've got 80,000 all the way across. How is it? How long is it? 240,000, 3 times. 80,000 plus 80,000 plus 80,000 equals 240,000. Okay? Across the first playful sea is 80,000 leagues. This is the vast inner sea. On its sides along the shore of the yoke holder mountains are triple its width, or 240,000 leagues. The size of the other 6, the other seas are each half less. So the other playful seas are each half less in width than the previous. In other words, they're the same width as the mountain range that they're just outside of. So outside of the yoke holder, between the yoke holder and the plow holder, there is a 40,000 league across ocean, and then all the way. The rest is the great outer ocean. So the great outer ocean is outside. You've got this big square series of mountain ranges coming into Mount Meru in the center, going out to the outermost of these mountain ranges, and then outside of that, between that and the outer side is the rim holder mountains. Between the rim holder mountains and the outer ring, there's the great outer ocean. The rest is the great outer oceans. Across it is 322,000 leagues. That's pretty big. The rest of the water from the rim holder mountains to the outer iron mountains is the great outer ocean. It is filled with salt water. In width, it is 322,000 leagues across. Okay? Now, following this is kind of the explanation of the basic geography of the world. So now we've come to the, and within the topics, this is talked about the explanation of the mountains and seas. Where did we? So now so that's talking about the container's nature. That's talking about the basic nature. That's the first of the 4 topics of this section, which is general teaching on the container's nature. Now we've come to this explanation of the particular places, and here we mean the places where sentient beings live. So it begins with the places of humans. So it has 3 topics: the places of humans, the places of hell, and the places of the gods. So the places of humans, this has 2 topics: teaching the 12 lands in particular, and in general, and a particular explanation of the rose apple land. So teaching the 12 lands in general, this has 2 topics: explaining the 4 continents and explaining the 8 subcontinents. So like you remember from doing your mandala, you talk about the different continents and then the subcontinents on either side if you've done your mandala practice. So explaining the 4 continents, this has 4 points. Therein, that is within the great outer ocean, is the rose apple land, 2,000 leagues on 3 sides, shaped like a cart, with one of 3 1/2 leagues. Therein, in that poisonous ocean, the great outer ocean is called poisonous because it's got salt water. The other great inner seas all have water with the 8 qualities. It's not described so clearly in this commentary. Oh, it is mentioned there. I just skimmed over it quickly. The waters in the inner seas all have 8 qualities. In other words, they're really fresh and delicious and beneficial to drink. The outer ocean is salt, and within that poisonous salt ocean, to the south of the supreme mountain, is the rose apple land, which is 2,000 leagues on its 3 long sides. It is shaped like a cart, with one short side of 3 1/2 leagues, shaped like a cart. So let's take a look at it. We've got 3 sides of 2,000, and then one of just 3 1/2 leagues. Very, very short. It's kind of like, actually, picture the Indian subcontinent in your mind and imagine that there's a kind of straight line across the top and that it's 2,000 leagues on either side, which is huge. And then there's, the bottom of the Indian subcontinent in Kerala. It comes down kind of a point, but it's not quite a point. That's the shape that we're talking about. And it's saying that it's 3 1/2 leagues at that base, down in Kerala, and that each of the sides is then, basically, it's like a big triangle with just the tip chipped off of that triangle, right? And it's shaped like a cart. Now, this was really, when I first studied this, Khenpo said, "Oh yeah, it's just like the carts you see in India." It's like, what does that mean? And you don't see as many carts in India as you used to. But after we got taught this, then I was riding from Varanasi to Nepal, and we got stuck behind lots of carts, tractors, and some ox carts. And the way an Indian cart is made, they've got the 2 wheels, and then the sides of the cart are like this. There's a little tiny flat bed in the middle, but basically it's like this. And then they put the load of hay that goes on like this, and then over the top. It's like, and we were stuck behind one of these, and I looked at it and I said, okay, that's what Vasubandhu meant. It's not the shape of the cart in terms of this. It's like you've got this cart that's like that, and then you load it with hay or sugar cane, and you've got this one poor ox who's pulling it. I assume it's balanced so that actually it's not so difficult for the ox if they're not going up hills. And since North India is very flat, it probably wasn't much fun for the ox. At any rate, that's what we mean by saying it's shaped like a cart. Therefore, its perimeter measures 6,003 1/2 leagues. That's because you have 3 of 2,000, 6,000 plus 3 1/2. Its depth extends 80,000 leagues down. All 4 continents have an equal depth. So basically, just outside the continental shelf, it drops way off, 80,000 leagues down into the sea. The shape and size of superior body. So superior body is the eastern continent, in Tibetan Lupapo, or in Sanskrit Videha. Superior body is half-moon-like. 3 of its sides are like here. 1 is 3 1/2 leagues. Okay, so you've got 3 are like here. It's half-moon-like. Well, it's not really half-moon because you've got 3, because it's actually like a trapezoid. To put it in modern terms, it's a trapezoid. Actually, Rose Apple Land is also basically trapezoid, although it's got one very short side, so it doesn't look like a trapezoid. But superior body, you've got half moon-like, and 3 of its sides are like here. So the 3 of its sides are 2,000, and 1 is 350 leagues. 3 1/2 is 300s plus half 100 equals 350. From Rose Apple Land, on the side of the Supreme Mountain to the east, is the eastern superior body, which is half-moon-like in shape. 3 of its sides are like here, the Rose Apple land at a length of 2,000 leagues each. One side is 3 1/2, or 350 leagues long. Its perimeter measures 603,050 leagues. Because its level is 7 talas above sea level, Or alternately, because human bodies there have bodies that are twice as large as humans here, it is called the superior body. So a tala is a unit of measure of height. It is a palm tree. So it is 7 palm trees raised up above. Like, especially if you go to India, until you get to kind of mountains. I was in Varanasi just this past winter. And when I was in Varanasi, I downloaded an altimeter app, and I checked to see what the altitude there, because I was curious to see how much lower it was than Nepal, where I'd been a little while before. And it turned out that the altitude in Varanasi was something like, I can't remember which unit it was. That's right, it was 80 meters. 80 meters above sea level, which is not much because it's a long way from the sea. The Ganges has to flow a long way to get from Varanasi to the ocean, and it is only descending 240 meters over the course of, like, I don't know, probably another 1,000 kilometers of river. So it's a pretty small slope. But I discovered that actually if you want to feel better about your altitude in Varanasi, you just measure it in centimeters, and you're at 8,000 centimeters above sea level, and it sounds much better. So, from that perspective of the North Indian plain, the North Indian plain is not 7 talas above the ground. It's only when you get to the Deccan Plateau. So, for that reason, the eastern continent is taller. Alternately, it's called the superior body because the humans born there have bodies that are twice as large as the humans here. Therefore, it is called the superior body. The size and shape of the bountiful cow land. The bountiful cow land is round 7,500 leagues across its mid 2,500. On the west face of the superior mountain, or to the west face, is the bountiful cow land. It is round, and it is 7,500 leagues in circumference. Across its its diameter is 2,500 leagues. It is bountiful with cows and jewels, and the river Sawaka flows through its middle. So the circumference is 7,500 leagues, and across the mid 2,500. Again, there's no pi here. We're not going to worry about that extra 0.14. So that's the bountiful cow land in the west, Gaudaniya in Sanskrit. And the shape and size of unpleasant sound, Uttarakuru. The unpleasant sound 8 equals square. It's 8,000 leagues across. The sides are equal, and it is square. That's all you need to know. Very concise. It's also very concise in Tibetan and Sanskrit. On the north face of the supreme mountain is unpleasant sound, where they speak the language of ghosts, or where one's death is prophesied 7 days prior to its occurrence. Its perimeter is 8,000 leagues, with 4 equal sides of 2,000 leagues each, and square in shape. Humans' faces are similar to the continents they live on. Now, this is an interesting one. I think if you look at it, that the chin is kind of small on our continent, and the cheeks and everything are a little bit wide, but I still don't sort of see like a triangular face. But we'll see. And I haven't met anyone who's got a square face from the northern continent. Okay, explaining the 8 subcontinents. Between our 8 subcontinents, Deha, Videha, Kurava, Kaurava, Chamara, Avara, and Shata and Uttaramantrina. Between them are the 8 subcontinents, Deha and Videha on the sides of the eastern continent, Kurava and Kaurava on the sides of the northern continent, Chamara and Napachamara, Avara Chamara on the sides of the southern continent, and Shata and Uttaramantrina are on the sides of the western continent. So those are the 8 subcontinents. Now, we have a particular explanation of the Rose Apple Land. To the north of here, across the 9 Black Mounts, is the Snow Mountain, and then on the near side of Perfume Mountain is a lake with waters 50 across, 50 leagues, that is. So you go to the north, there are 9 black mountain ranges, and then there's the Snow Mountain, and then on the near side of the Perfume Mountain is a lake with waters 50 across. To the north of here, the Rose Apple Land, across 9 black mounts, there is the Great Snow Mountain, And then, further to the north of that is the Perfume Mountain, and 10 leagues away, on its near south side, there's a lake with waters 50 across. This is called the Unheated Lake, Anavatapta, whose waters have the 8 qualities. It is difficult for people who do not have miraculous powers to get there. Hard to go. Those mountains, the Himalayan, the snow mountains, are pretty big. And it really was extremely difficult to cross them back at the time of the Buddha. On the shore of the unheated lake, there is a rose apple tree with sweet fruit. When its clay pot-sized fruit grows. So a clay pot, when you think about clay pots, these are like water pots. They're about this tall in India, you can see them. And they're kind of about the shape of a rose apple too. I don't know if you've seen rose apples, but they're like water pots in shape, and they're kind of reddish in color on the outside. They grow in India and Indonesia and Southeast Asia. You don't see them in India so much. I've seen them more in Southeast Asia. Ripens, the Nagas emanate as fish and eat it, and what is not eaten becomes the gold of the Rose Apple River, it is heard. So there's a river that flows out of it, and that is the Jambu River, and the Jambu River has the gold. So sometimes and that is said to be the purest, the most refined, best gold. And it's got the best color. So when they talk about someone's complexion in the sutra, someone has a really beautiful complexion, they'll talk about someone who has a complexion like the gold from the Jambu River. Like there's the, what was her name? It's terrible, I can't remember her name. One of the great arhats was a really beautiful, beautiful woman. She had skin of the color of Jambu gold. She married Kashyapa. Do we need a diversion? Maybe not so much of it. Anyways, this is a common comparison for a nice complexion is the gold of the Jambu River. Based on this tree, the continent is called the Rose Apple Land. So when you talk about Jambudvipa, Jambu means rose apple. Some people call it an Indian blackberry. It's got various different names, but it's mostly called in English rose apples. Dvipa means land. There were some trees of this type around the ancient city of Kapilavastu, because it is told that the Bodhisattva achieved dhyana under the shade of such a tree. So one day when the Bodhisattva, that is Siddhartha Gautama, the prince, went out, he was probably in his teens at this point, he went out and he saw all the people working in the fields, and he was kind of felt compassion for them, engaged in all that hard labor. And he sat down under the Jambu tree and sat down and he achieved dhyana meditation sitting down beneath a rose apple tree. So that is the tree, the name of the tree. There's the unheated lake, which is probably similar to we probably call it Manarasovar now, and it's not, we don't see it as 50 leagues across these days, but in that day they said it was. There are 4 rivers that come from it. There is the Sindhu, which is now we call the Indus. There is the Ganga. There is the Sita River. And then there is the Pakchu River. And the Pakchu River apparently, according to Louis de Vallée-Poussin, that is the river that flows between Iran and Tajikistan up to the Aral Sea, which the Greeks and Romans called the Oxal, O-X-A-L River. So that is... that could well be. At any rate, there are 4 great rivers that came from that sea, and as mentioned in the auto commentary. So that is enough text for today, and your homework for tomorrow. I don't usually give homework, so you might be surprised to learn that you're having homework. But we have to use all the tools, since we all come up with modern education. We are used to doing things with modern education that they don't even think of doing in a traditional education. And if people who have modern education really want to understand the nature of the world and the geography of the world, what do? We draw maps. So your homework for tomorrow is to draw a map to scale. That's the hard point. You have to pick your scale very carefully. I would suggest that if you like metric measurements, that you consider starting out with either 1 or 2 millimeters per 1,000 leagues, depending upon the size of your piece of paper. Even if you do with 1 millimeter for as your 1 millimeter for 1,000 leagues as your scale, you're still going to need a pretty big piece of paper, right? Okay. And all of you who are doing this at home, you can do it too. Our studio audience will get to have their artwork displayed tomorrow. Okay? And it has to be to scale. It's very important, especially that the continents be to scale, especially that one side of Jambudvipa. Okay? So that is because otherwise you won't get a sense of what we're talking, the scale of the universe that they're talking about this. Otherwise it's just like, you sort of think, and you see pictures of the universe if you look at there are various places where you get diagrams of the mandala offerings and so forth, and you get these pictures and there are these sizes and shapes of continents and so forth. But if you actually look at the numbers, take a look at the numbers and put it together, and I think you'll be kind of surprised. Okay? So that is enough for today. So please let us now dedicate the merit of teaching and listening to the Dharma to the benefit of all sentient beings. Osanam de tam je se bani Tomne bedranam pamchene Kegana chimbala trombai Sibe tsole drowa shon. Okay, so